Welcome to the Kolbecast, episode 256. Thank you for joining us. Today, Bonnie and I are joined by Kolbe's own Maggie Hayden and Nicole O'Connor. In this first of two parts, Maggie and Nicole take us through how Kolbe implements its classical education from pre-K through 12th grade. This first week, we'll walk through the elementary years, and we'll be back next week to cover the middle and high school years. We hope that you'll enjoy the show.
Hi there, I'm Bonnie, Kolbe homeschooling mom of 4 lads and lasses, liturgical musician, popcorn, and podcast fanatic.
And this is Stephen, homeschooling father of 5 and director of development for Kolbe Academy.
We're picking up one of the main conversational threads that runs through Kolbecast episodes, the distinctions, implementation, and value of classical education. Stephen took us through these distinctions in episode 243, and we've done several other Kolbecast episodes that consider various aspects of Catholic classical education in various ways. And I'll tell you at the end how to find those episodes and listen to those if you haven't yet already. With us today to dive into implementing classical education are 2 longtime friends of the Kolbecast, Maggie Hayden, Stephen's wife, and Kolbe Academy's curriculum director, and Nicole O'Connor, who has served Kolbe in various ways over the years, currently as principal of PK through 12. Welcome back, Nicole and Maggie.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Likewise. Looking forward to this.
It's always good to see you guys. And Nicole, it's been a long time since I've seen you actually. I had the privilege of having Maggie come on and co-host with me a recent episode. So Nicole, I'm going to start with you. How have you been and what have you been up to, and catch us up a little bit?
Yeah, it has been a while. I guess I've been busy.
Yep.
Busy couple years, lots of good things. We're on our 5th year of the online elementary program at Kolbe.
Wow.
So things are kind of steadying, I would say. We've been building and evolving, and I feel like we've done a lot of great work with curriculum. Maggie and I have gotten to work together quite a bit, working on the elementary curriculum. But as far as the program goes, I have 2 amazing department chairs who have really taken the reins on that elementary program. And so I've been diving back into my first love and my first place at Kolbe, which is the upper school. So as you mentioned, I'm now transitioning into the principal role for Kolbe. I'm very excited. I love working with teachers. I love working on, the full picture, the story, if you will, of K to 12. And I think that's really what I've been up to, looking at what is the Kolbe Academy story of a student who starts in pre-K, which is our brand new baby program, all the way through 12th grade, which has been around for a while. So that's the update. Other than that, my girls are growing older and, still living in California and enjoying the sun.
Okay. Well, that all sounds good. Good deal. And it's the 5-year thing. That's amazing to me. Where does the time go?
Yeah,
That's amazing.
I know.
And congratulations on all the success of that. I hear so many good things. And I know it's the contributions you and Maggie have, along with many others, to make that such a success. So that's great. I'll link some of our episodes with some of our elementary teachers in the show notes. So Maggie, how have you been? What have you been up to? How are things going?
Well, it's going well. When we were last talking, we were in the middle of developing all of this year's materials, and we're just wrapping those up. So I'm really excited with my amazing team and what they have been able to put out this year, and the direction of where we're going next and what areas we're working on. Just kind of a sneak preview here, but we're going to start working on literature program in middle school. So that's one of our upcoming projects that Nicole and I are going to be diving into.
Very cool. We'll look forward to hearing more about that as it comes along. So today we want to discuss some kind of particulars about implementing classical education. Today we'll cover kindergarten through 5th grade, and in the next episode, we'll take up middle school through high school. And we're going to take an ages and stages approach and discuss some things that parents should and can do in each area, and what Kolbe has in the way of support for families along the way. Before we get started, Maggie, is there anything kind of overarching that you want to say to kind of set this up, some starting points here overall?
Yeah, I'd love to just say a few years ago, several of us, but Nicole and I included, got to really dive into our Kolbe founding documents and think a lot about classical education and of course, that was something that was very dear to St. Ignatius of Loyola. And so we have really thought about the principles that he used in teaching students, because he didn't plan on being a teacher, especially of young students when he started, but God called him to that. So we've looked into things that, what sorts of things he thought were important. We've looked at our program in light of that. And um, we also have a lot of wonderful teachers and homeschooling parents who uh, gave us feedback as we were going along, telling us, you know, the things we just see. These are what children are naturally good at, what they need to work on, what kinds of skills set you up for success later. So that was one of the key areas in working with Nicole on this. Was we were looking at what things do the little kids have to know to be able in K to 2, to be able to do third to fifth, to be able to move into sixth or eighth grade and then up to high school. What's going to make them successful? And we found there were some very common basic things that fit beautifully in with classical education. So and in addition to that, I guess I'd say so, but one of the outcomes of all of this, that all the stuff we looked at, was also seeing what sorts of materials are we choosing for the students, because it's also important in classical education that it's about virtue, about beauty, about truth. And so we went back through all of our materials to make sure that we were giving students really quality materials. And actually, that's what we're going to talk about, with what parents should be doing as well,
Okay.
all the way through, so that they actually have things worth practicing their skills with. That's going to enrich their lives and make them better people, hopefully. Certainly, they're children of God and they're worthy of an education that reflects God's beauty. And that is what we wanted to make sure we're giving them, and what Kolbe has always been about. And we're just trying to articulate that really clearly now for families so that they understand what our mission is
Yeah.
as a school.
I think too, when Maggie and I were diving deep into, really making sure we're presenting the vision and the approach to classical education to our families, it became clear that a lot of people know, or at least have an idea of what classical education means in the upper grades. Primary sources, Western Canada. There's a lot of things. It gets talked about a lot. And the lower grades, there's not a ton out there. And so we were really digging, and we wanted to create resources and information for our families and really streamline how we talk about it. So I think as we got together and as we were looking at our materials and looking at what we wanted our families to experience, it became very clear that, as Maggie said, in the lower grades, it's a very formative stage. So we're talking about forming them in virtue, good habits, and in order to do that, giving them good examples of that. But then also, we just really focused in on reading. Reading is the foundation of all education, but especially a classical one where they're going to go on to read very difficult texts, and reading will be such a core part of their experience at Kolbe. And so we found ourselves diving back into the beautiful vision of our founder, Diane Muth, and the way that was her impetus. She was the reading expert, and she really came forth with a vision for reading. And so we've been working really hard to try to capture that and preserve that focus for our kids in the lower ages. So I'll let Maggie talk a little more about that on the curriculum side, but I would say, in those lower stages, we really focused on love of learning and wonder and goodness, foundational skills, and especially in the area of reading, all of the areas, but especially reading, and then formation of virtue and exposure to goodness. Would anything to add there, Maggie, or does that kind of tee up what we've been trying
Well,
to do with
I think
curriculum?
you got that. Yep, exactly. Yeah, that is exactly what we've been trying to do.
And I really love that you're here to talk about these things, because I think you're absolutely right that when people hear, there's a lot of people have these preconceived notions about what classical education is. And I think you're right, Nicole, that sometimes it's just like, oh, read those great books, read the great books. And but I think it's we've all seen classical curriculum is really there's no end to the learning. It's giving you the tools for a lifelong pursuit where you will continue to learn and you've got the wonder and things. So yeah, I know, but it'll come up at times. Even I remember talking to the advisors in a meeting and they're like, well, we could see we read the Iliad or whatever in high school. What do we say about the younger grades, which we'll get into today? But I was pointing out to them, well, you don't even though like if you think the best food is a steak, a filet mignon or a ribeye in my case. I think I've said this before in the podcast, but you don't give your infant a ribeye. You give them the food that's appropriate to them so that they can eat the really good food later. And that's kind of my analogy in what we're doing here is like you're saying, you're building the habits, you're inspiring wonder, and it's all building. It's giving them what they can receive and love and preparing them for continued pursuits, basically. But
That's a great analogy, Stephen. I would add to something that someone told me, I don't remember when I was studying classical education and talking about literature in particular, how something kind of unique in the way you approach classical education in the younger ages is that you have to expose them to multiple levels, essentially, because you want to do those read alouds with things that are above their level, perhaps reading wise, but the content is so rich. Then you also need to read those really introductory texts where they're doing the hard work, and that it's this it's setting them up to be able to take ownership and maybe cook the ribeye, right? And do it there,
yes.
but also having them have the taste for it and want it. And my family, we do read alouds all the time for that reason of there's so many great books that I want them to hear at the age they're at, even though they couldn't read them themselves, because then they're seeing, especially with epics, right? We do a lot of epics, The Hobbit, things like that as read alouds, because they're seeing that pattern and that struggle. They couldn't necessarily muscle through it themselves, but then when they get there, it's familiar to them. And so that repetition that we've talked about a lot with St. Ignatius and classical, it's that constant kind of cycle of exposure that I love so much about classical education. It's like you get them excited, and then when they're actually ready to do it, they're already kind of primed and ready to experience it. So
the word that comes to mind so often is calibration. And I live amongst engineers and mechanics, and they're always calibrating something. So it seems applicable here.
Yeah, along those lines, Nicole had mentioned Diane Muth and her vision. She taught reading using the Catholic National Readers, which, by the way, we are starting to reprint those. We've redone the inside so it's crisp and clean and beautiful, but the same stories with some comprehension questions so that it can be used for comprehension. But those books are amazing for young, just starting readers because they are very simple as a story, but the language is slightly more challenging. So once they have gotten their basic reading down, and we'll talk a little bit, I know too, about the reading, we chose a reading program that would kind of bring in all the senses, really emphasize foundational reading skills for the students. We were concerned that we make sure our students are reading well, but then we're going to give them these first readers that actually have stories worth reading about, even if they're simple. And the language is a little bit more challenging. So it's just when they get to that point, we can just push them a little bit to help them read. But at the same time, we started bringing in literature for all the levels, not just in third grade, but start literature with them young so they're hearing, like Nicole was saying, those stories. And then we also brought in poetry for the same reason. We want them learning poems because it's a different pattern and it's important to be exposed to it. And the Iliad is a poem and the Odyssey is a poem. And so how are you going to read poems in high school and understand them if you haven't started when they're very young with just the simple little poems, but that give them that pattern? So we were very intentional about poetry, real books above their level to help them read and immerse themselves in a language that they could not read on their own, but give them that that familiarity and that love of the beautiful. And then we tried to actually pick our readers to help support that as well. So we're really emphasizing that the reading in the lower grades. And honestly, if you did nothing else with those K-2 kids, pre-K to 2, if they learned how to read, they'd be okay. Not that that's all you should do, but that's what it's about.
Yeah, absolutely. I always say, yeah, on those homeschooling days when you're totally overwhelmed and pulling out your hair and need a break, just read. Just take the day to read, if you do nothing else that day. So
Good
I always
reset
try to
too.
remember that. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's a great reset. That my oldest uses that often when she's overwhelmed with homework and things. Just read a chapter and
Mhm.
then
Yep.
get back to it. Speaking of poetry, Maggie, I know the online teachers have a love-hate relationship with the vision I came in with the variety show because I don't know if we've talked about the variety show on the podcast before, but
No.
when I started the elementary program, there were two kind of events, I guess, that were really important to me, maybe three, in starting an elementary program. One was our All Saints program where they're learning about a saint and they dress up just because it's so adorable at that age. I didn't want us to go without it. But then the second was the variety show, which is where they all memorize the poem and perform it. And the reason it's love hate is because it's really hard to coordinate that online. It's not as easy as when you're in a brick and mortar school, getting the kids all to memorize and coming up with actions. But it was just that it's such an important piece of a classical education. And it's one of the fondest memories I have of teaching in a brick and mortar classical school is it was every year, we took time out of our instruction to make sure they memorized a good poem, a poem that either was, would help them remember something virtuous or it was silly and it would just bring joy to their day or whatever it was. We memorized a lot of Robert Louis Stevenson and things like that. But every year, that's my favorite day in elementary. And I know the teachers work really hard to make it happen, but I hope that what it does is it allows the kids to have a memory and a poem that stays with them forever. And I feel like that's another gift of the memorization aspect of a classical education is kind of like our faith in Catholicism, on the days when you're struggling and you really need to pray we have all these prayers memorized that we can fall back on and we have the rosary and it's such a beautiful tool and poetry can be that too, especially in education. You're writing a paper, you need something inspiring to add, and luckily you've memorized a bunch of poems and they can help you make your point.
Yeah, I was just wanted to add to that because, that really is that memory skills at the little kids, it's so hard for them, but it's so good. If you just get through it when they're little, they'll be so much better off when they're older. So it's one of those things, the memorizing that poem, it's patterns of language. It does double duty, like you were saying, Nicole. It gives them the memory skills that they, start building those tools that they need for later, for anything, for math, for multiplication tables. They're going to need that for learning their faith, the Baltimore Catechism, or whatever, these principal doctrines of the faith. They need that memory to work well. They need it to work for languages later. They need it for science terms in high school. So in those lower grades, you learn how to read first, and second most important thing is the memory. And so if you can't do it elsewhere, poetry is a great place to do it for the overwhelmed mom at her home who's thinking, I can't possibly do 60 different things with all my children because I have so many and this little one wants things. But, it doesn't matter what you do as long as they read and they do poetry because they'll memorize. Read them saint stories so they get examples of virtue. And that ties into what Nicole, you were saying about your saints, the Saints Day program, and then expose them to beauty in any way you can. We intentionally did that in our program. Art, beautiful, images, it matters, beautiful books. We wanted our pre-K, our kinder programs to be beautiful. And that's because beauty matters. But there are many ways you can do that. Take them to art museums, take them to botanical gardens, take them to the zoo and admire the beauty of the animals at the zoo. Have them draw them, take them on a nature walk, pick a tree in your yard and have them trace it throughout the year. All of that is promoting something that will set them up for the later years.
Yeah. I know that's something you and I worked on as well with just our teaching materials. So part of implementing the beautiful curriculum you have, sometimes, you need textbooks and that's great, but we're always very selective with the textbooks as well. But when the teachers are bringing that textbook to the students, trying to make PowerPoints that have sacred art or beautiful images that create those connections to beauty for them. And I know for homeschooling parents, you can look online and find things that connect, but we don't always have time. So something that our family always did was we have a lot of art books in our house. So that way it was just we could find the random connection in our home library or whatever it was. And I always found a lot of joy in trying to find what is the random connection we could make to art or something visual, even if we're learning about science terms or who knows what it is.
Yeah, yeah. Well, you've laid some beautiful groundwork for classical education in the earliest years. So let's get into some particulars of the curriculum and its implementation.
Yeah, so yeah, in K to 2, we first of all, it's important we intentionally picked it's a newer phonics program, but it kind of checked all our boxes. So we've moved our phonics program to Sadlier phonics, which is it's really solid. It's based on Orton Gillingham method that works, and it had a lot of extra support. I was excited in that their teacher manual was actually very helpful for even a homeschooling mother, which sometimes those teacher manuals are not, but this is. It was a nice program. So we've moved to that. We have our different math tracks, but we made our own math programs in pre-K and kindergarten, kind of setting up a good foundation with understanding basics of mathematics, unity, relationships, those terms that are going to be key for later math knowledge. And then the rest of the program was just so much fun to make because after we got the basics out and we knew the foundation was there, we just jumped into our themes, which is we have an intentional theme. So it starts in my world. The child doesn't know the time relationships. Little children don't. Dinosaurs could have been yesterday for all they know. So we focused it on, we have an intentionality to every year now. The first year is their world, their world, their world they live in, their neighborhood, their house, their community. And then in the second year, we expanded that out to the next closest thing to them outside their family, which is Jesus, or should be. And that's what we're training them to. So it's their world and Jesus's world. And in our kindergarten program, we followed the liturgical season, so that they could get activities that were appropriate to every time of year. So studying caves around the time of, Easter is a good time. And then we tied it in to the Holy Land. So they're comparing for the first time their life to what Jesus's life, what might have been like as a little child. What foods would he have eaten? What animals would he have seen? That kind of thing. It just makes that connection. And then we're carrying that out in first grade with our first grade will be all about our fathers in faith, the Bible stories that should be familiar and just there for the children, learning about Abraham, about Isaac, about Moses, and we want to connect that all to, through beautiful art as well, and these stories, and even to the geography of the places, learning about these countries rather than separating knowledge of Egypt as a country from the Bible stories. That doesn't mean anything to the little children. They don't know that, but they can have an idea of the time within Abraham's story or Isaac's story, or understand he's the son and what that would mean, and follow through the stories that way. So we have that as our theme in first grade. And then in second grade, we'll be moving into the call to Christianity, looking at from the time of Jesus spreading out. So the Roman Empire, how is it part of Jesus's plan? Because we really want them to understand that every bit of history is incarnational. And that is the theme. So everything sort of fits into that through beauty, through truth. And while we haven't fully implemented that in every grade, that is what we are moving to. And it's because in the classical model, the incarnation is the key event. It's the most important thing. So we are making sure, and all our literature is already there. We're building that out. We have a new literature program for second grade this year, which is just great classic stories for children, but with really good classical exercises built in to kind of help them begin analysis and pre-writing skills that will help them articulate what they are learning in all these different areas. So we have, that is what we've been doing, what our program has kind of covered, but there is intentionality in every piece that we are putting out there. And we're thinking with every book we have, how is this working? And we have looked over it. And if it's in the program, there is a reason for it.
Could see that integration right from the get-go there. That idea of integrating across the subjects comes up time and again. You can see it there too, and definitely the intentionality. Nicole, do you want to speak to the implementation of all that good stuff?
Sure. Yeah. So that integrating the subjects together was another thing that was a goal right when we launched elementary out of the gate, was trying to make sure there was an avenue for teachers to draw connections, especially for the little kids, and to have that flexibility. And so that's why, a lot of people will ask, why can't I sign up my child just for history in kindergarten? Or why can't I just an online, or I guess not just in online, because we're integrating more across the board. That's the direction we're going. And that's the reason, is that you sign up for the grade level for the kindergarten program as opposed to a kindergarten subject, so that there's that ability to connect all the pieces together and to make it a whole story. So I mentioned earlier, a big part of Maggie and I's discussions lately is, what is the story from K to 12 for our students? But it's the same in every grade level. So how are we connecting their skills to their content? How are we connecting science and math and literature and history, so that it all becomes very natural? I think that's what I love about that approach to an integrated educational experience, is you're not checking boxes and you're not just completing one thing and then the next and then the next. You're very much experiencing either a time period, or you're experiencing a goal that is very much connected on multiple levels. So for elementary, I think the goal with implementing both the curriculum we had and also the wonderful new curriculum that Maggie was just speaking about is to make sure we're training our teachers on the intention behind that curriculum. And also with our course plans, which Maggie can speak more to, but training our homeschooling parents of, here's the vision, here's why we did it this way, here's how these pieces connect. And so one way, very practically, that we've tried to do that is through our course plans, and it being very much a glance of the week. So rather than it being, here's this course plan and then this one, it's this week we're talking about the virtue of perseverance. And you're going to see that in the story of Abraham, and you're going to see that in the story, all of these pieces. And so it provides either the teacher or the parent with a map to make those connections very naturally, and then a way to kind of bring it back for the student in every lesson they do.
Taking that integrated approach has so much appeal. How do you make room for or allow for a student being, and maybe this is more applicable to older students rather than the very young students, but when they are kind of more advanced in one area and need a little bit more support in another, or if they have various learning needs that may not yet be evident or will become evident at some point, how does all that factor in that flexibility dimension that a lot of folks are seek homeschooling for?
Yeah. Well, certainly there are ways we implement it, which I can let Nicole speak to. But as far as the homeschooling parent goes, if you know what the intention is, that you want to build a good reader, a student who's a good reader, a good at math, basic skills, if our materials are too challenging, you replace those with others that will work better for your student. There's always room for that with those foundational skills. If you understand as a parent that your child has to get the reading at this level And that is going to be key, and that maybe you might have to adjust math for whatever reason. Maybe even because you have to spend more time doing reading. There are good programs out there that homeschooling families can use. That one that comes to mind is All About Reading. It's a very solid program. It's more time intensive. So, but a student who needs more time, you can replace that. But the rest of the material, it doesn't matter if the child is behind or ahead. It's beautiful, it's deep, it's rich. You can go as deep in it as you need to with the advanced student. You may find with a student who just has to spend so much time reading that or doesn't have the attention span that they can't do everything else. Some of those subjects may be hit or miss on certain days, but you know what? The same exposure should be offered for them. They will respond to it. So the only areas where that's really going to be an issue are those two core areas, and use substitute if needed.
Okay.
And online, I'll let Nicole speak to that, but we've thought about that there too.
Yeah, absolutely. And I agree with everything Maggie said. Even for online, there are areas that everyone, the exposure to the content and like, for example, the literature, if your child isn't ready to read that literature novel, it can be read to them, or there are ways that they can still get the experience that the other students are getting while still working on those skills that maybe they have a learning disability or a struggle in, and using something that works for them. So my oldest has learning struggles as well. And so the approach we've taken a lot, even when doing online classes, is tailor. So when it is the skill based, then we need to step back. So for example, in phonics, if we needed to use a different reading curriculum that was meant for really strategic, explicit phonics, which our new program actually has multiple levels of differentiation in the book. So there's a wider umbrella we're casting with that as to how, helping parents know how they can help their reader depending on what their needs are, their struggles are. But even if say that didn't work and they needed another curriculum, they could still swap those things out and then still partake in the actual curriculum experience of the literature and the history and the full map of how they're integrated. So in online, we have accounted for that with different groups. So we have reading groups in elementary. And so even though they're all getting the same curriculum, there's flexibility in the pacing and how the kids are exposed to that curriculum. Some students need more examples than others. Some need more practice. And so the teachers do a lot of work getting to know their students and then implementing the curriculum in a way that serves more than just a one size fits all, which doesn't exist. That's not a thing, but they differentiate. But then there's even more that a parent can do on that side. And advisors are really great in that they kind of know the ins and outs of how to massage things and tailor even a all integrated curriculum into something that can work for the individual needs of a family. But I think to summarize my long explanation, it's really what Maggie said. There's areas where it doesn't matter because you can go as deep as you need to or pull back. And then there's areas where it's a little easier to swap things out because it's very skill based and it's very much just getting them on a path. And it can be tailored to the students.
Okay.
Yes. And I did just want to add too that we have amazing tutoring lab, teachers who help out as well. We have some really wonderful reading teachers. So if families are worried about that with our online program and implementing it and thinking they wanted to go that route, we've got some amazing ladies there who can help students struggle. It is incredible.
Yeah. Shout out to Karen Allgood.
Yeah.
We have a whole student support program available to the homeschooling families and online families. And really with that purpose in mind is because we believe a classical education is for everyone. We want to make sure we have the supports to support families to utilize it. And so, we have reading tutors that are just phenomenal. And then other reading programming in those lower grades to help kids who maybe just need a little extra support to be successful.
Good deal. We've gotten to talk to a few of those ladies. We'll link those episodes in our show notes and including a link to the student support services section on the Kolbe website so folks can explore that as well. Okay, so heading out of second grade into the upper elementary, third through fifth grade, let's head in that direction.
That's great. All right. Well, third through fifth grade are fun. We've, again, when we were looking at what what skills do third through fifth graders need? It's really more about developing those same tools. So they need to continue to push their reading to be fluent readers. You really want them to try to develop a fluency with reading, to start really building good math habits. Multiplication tables are so important. Learning those things that are going to set them up for success. So in a way, the focus is still really the same. They have to be good readers and they have to um, do well with math. But other areas become more important. And I think part of that is because it's helping them become virtuous in their ability to study, that they understand they have subjects and they have to turn their mind to different things. And to a certain extent, you want them to learn to be self-directed. I mean, as much as they can be, here's your subject, do this subject. You have a responsibility to do these things. So part of it in those grades is really is about habits. It's including focus again on memory, but we are definitely, I would say our focus is on them starting to do history chronologically, starting to think about things more chronologically. In science, we have these wonderful hardcore texts where the students get to really look into scientific theory. They're wonderful. They have experiments. They are simple in their approach, but lead students to the right questions, to wonder about things, to think about things. In history, we tell them we actually start out the first year as person-based. It's biographical. We have our third grade text is, great inventors of history, great scientists, important people, and they read these biographies within a framework and they put them on a timeline because we want them to do that activity of the timeline. So timeline became important because you want them not only to memorize, but to order. You want them to start ordering things. You don't give them the order anymore. They start to provide the order. And then in fourth and fifth in our history, it's sequential. We're starting with the ancient world and we're going all through the United States, finishing up with the US history at the end of fifth. So they're going through everything chronologically. And we're showing that, we want them to pick the important events. You're reading this text. What are the key things? Put those on a timeline. So order, judgment, starting that process, and they're learning about their faith. What things are important? What do you memorize? What do you have to recall? What things are connected? How do the Ten Commandments connect to, the new commandments? Those ideas of looking at the sacraments, living your life in Christ, all those things are really important. But then I think at this level, I'd say also pushing them with real beautiful stories that fill their minds with virtuous examples that are not the lesson just like here's a story about this virtue, but here's a story that's good. What did you respond to in it? And leading them to make those judgments is what we're doing. So our literature materials are going to guide the student to making those judgments, and everything is towards guided, directed judgment. So memory and directed judgment, and giving that foundation, pushing still the poetry, pushing still the challenging literature. We're intentionally picking books that are easier and harder and pushing them so that they can both gain comfort with reading with easier things, but also be pushed towards what's coming in the next grades. And then we're starting grammar for
Yeah.
grammar is key. And I'll let Nicole speak to that a little bit more because English is her jam.
Yeah.
I love it. I
Lots
love
of
grammar.
grammar. It really ramps up in third grade. Third, fourth, and fifth, they start their diagramming. It's very direct instruction when it comes to grammar, and you don't see that everywhere anymore. So that's something I think is unique to Kolbe that I love about Kolbe is they get a lot of hands-on and very direct grammar instruction. I will say, just kind of zooming back a little bit, um, self-activity is something we've talked about in previous episodes, I'm sure, is a goal that's an outcome we hope for all Kolbe students, right? Is that they grow in self-activity. And I feel like from third to fifth grade, it's this very challenging growth experience for the parent to kind of promote that self-activity because they're not there yet and they're going to be working on it all through their Kolbe experience. But it's when you're just starting to release the reins a little bit and promote them to ask those questions. As Maggie mentioned with literature, you're not just feeding them the answers anymore. You're saying, okay, we read this amazing story about this boy who climbed up the mountain and he had all these trials. What does that mean? And where do you go? And they're not in a place where it's just a very unguided discussion yet, where you just kind of say, okay, figure it out. But you are not wanting to over explain or still give them everything. So I think for teachers of third, fourth, and fifth and parents, it's a really fun aspect or area of learning in that you're seeing your child have these new light bulb moments that are very much their own. But it's a huge temptation as a teacher or parent kind of overhelp because they're not quite there yet. It takes a lot of fortitude as a parent to watch your third grader kind of struggle along and make those discoveries themselves when you're used to in those lower grades in kinder through second really guiding them a lot more directly. So that's one piece I always like to talk about with parents of homeschooling kiddos in those younger years is it's kind of your testing year where you help a little, you pull back, you help a little, you pull back, and having guides and guided notes, and there's different areas that we can help them. So that's a focus. And I think grammar is one of the areas that we're still very much building a foundation. So we're giving them the framework. So that's what diagramming is, right? You're giving them basically this puzzle to fill out about their parts of speech. And they should know the parts of speech, at least in theory, and they're having to put it into practice. And so it's their first little puzzle to solve when it comes to language. And it's just so much fun. I know grammar comes quicker or later for many kids. For me, it was much later. I didn't have a lot of explicit grammar as a kid. I think that's why I love diagramming so much now is when I finally was exposed to that level of direction but independence when it came to learning how to break apart a sentence, it kind of clicked for me. So that's the hope, I think, is that they get to have their own light bulb moment with grammar in third, fourth, and fifth, and then they just keep building on that all through high school, really. And then as far as composition goes, I would say I'll let Maggie speak more on that too, but I think it's similar in that you're trying to set up the template or the framework so that they can start putting their own ideas into practice.
I was trying to kind of come up with an analogy for what's the difference between K through 2 and 3 through 5? And it almost seems like the K through 2, you're trying to get them to take their first steps. And then 3 through 5 is them getting the walking and the running, kind of building up to running and jumping and skipping or whatever. I know it's just maybe not a great analogy, but it seems like there's a little bit of I don't know, something like that.
Yeah. Or even the playground, right? You follow them kind of around the playground, just letting them fall a little bit when they're young. And then you get to a point where, okay, now they're going to climb all the way to the top of that railing and you're going to watch and see how it goes. But maybe, give a little guidance.
One of the things that I have seen, it's really interesting. I was thinking about the idea of practice. So the biggest trap for parents is giving the child a sentence, like learning, for example, how to diagram a particular sentence or write a particular sort of composition, whether it's a sentence with a capital and a period and they've got it down and they've done it once, and then think, oh, good, we got that. Let's move on to the next thing. This is an age where that repetition is so important because they actually they can do it. Sometimes it clicks, but they're not old enough yet to always make the universal connection. That's one thing. And a lot of parents don't realize that. So they think, oh, good, they wrote this sentence with a capital letter and a period. We got that down. And then 2 days later, they get another sentence that has a comma in it, and they don't put a period and a capital because they didn't know what a comma was. And you realize like they don't understand the universal nature of every sentence should begin with a capital letter and every sentence should end with a period. So one of the most important things at this level is not trying to overwhelm the children with too much because the light bulb sometimes has not fully gone on, when a parent thinks it has. And
Mhm.
and that's why in grammar you do so many exercises, doing 7 or 8 of the sentence that looks the same may seem boring, but it's really important for them. Or writing the same 3 sentence paragraph about different topics, but over and over and over may seem boring, but it's really important. The classical composition program is one that Nicole and I both love, but the beauty of that program is repetition, constantly do the same thing over and over and over all year long.
Mhm.
And we did the same thing when we built out our history books. We have repetitions, certain assignments are there's every week there are certain assignments that always show up. Same thing, same look, different content, so they can practice that skill all year long. And then we have a few extra that are kind of fun, more fluffy though. I would say not the essential ones, um, but are to add the excitement and oh good, this week I get to, you know, bake a recipe that they would have baked in Egypt. And this week I get to color a picture. And this week I get to do a map. But the key things we just repeated every single week because um, that's what we knew they needed. So parents in judging, they need to look at a book and say, what's a repeated thing? That's what's important if it's good.
Yeah. I like to think of that format with classical composition as it's a safe place for them to explore creativity. So in that they know what's expected of them every week. So they don't have to think through, how do I start? What is this going to be? You eliminate all that anxiety. It's just, oh, I've done this before. This is familiar. But then the content's different and the way they can approach it each week is different. And so it really allows them to focus on what they're bringing to the table as opposed to having to decipher all the expectations of the teacher or all the expectations of the assignment. It's very much it's ready for their little brain to put in there what it needs to. And I know that that's also with our course plans and with the way we try to approach our curriculum is that same way, and that there's, like you said, we throw in the little curveballs for the excitement and the joy, but the format is the same so that people know what to expect and then can take that and run with it.
Yep. Kind of to wrap that up, it's really about observation on a different level. Like at the little kids level, you're just like, oh, look, that's a tree, that's a bug, what are they doing? Here is like, have you got the pattern down? Do you understand that this always is the case? Have you brought in enough particulars that you have made a universal? It's that use of observation. So it's really a development from the previous stage.
We are going to leave it here for now and take up the middle and high school years in our next episode. The show notes for this episode will be replete with links to related Kolbecast episodes and sections of the Kolbe website, so check those out for more on what we covered today. All our episodes are tagged with various attributes to help listeners find what's most helpful and interesting to them. So folks can also head to kolbe.org/podcast to explore the many options. That's kolbe.org/podcast. Nicole and Maggie, thanks for coming to share this with us today, and we will pick this up here again in the next episode.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. See you soon.
Subscribe to the Kolbecast on your favorite podcast app so that you don't miss an episode. And let us know how we're doing by leaving a rating or a review. And as always, feel free to email us at podcast@kolbe.org.
Mary, our Mother, pray for us. St. Maximilian Kolbe, St. Ignatius of Loyola, Holy Saints and Angels, pray for us. Ad Maiorem Dei Gloriam.